what I like to propose here in looking at Holland's position on how we can basically identify complex or distinguish complex from complicated systems is that he's looking for what mechanisms that we can use in order to identify what makes something complex versus complicated or even chaotic. Um, and I'm going to suggest that I believe that what we get when we get through Holland is basically he's identified it. It is by looking at the inputs and the outcomes, and not by actually looking at the process itself. And I'll tell you what I think he means by that, and how I came to that conclusion. And it is that he starts with the fact that all complex systems are generated systems. All right. So what he's saying is that the outcomes generated systems say that the outcomes are basically come from a process that's performed over the inputs. And this is a very common diagram or a very common way of looking at processes. Matter of fact, in process engineering, this is the standard for looking at processes in total, and certainly for looking at complex processes also. And what he's saying, his example is that you have generators, you have operators, and then you have combinations that are generated. And the way he does that is he says, okay, you have the alphabet, right? And then you have a bunch of rules for sentences, and you have sentences that are generated. The reason that this is complex is that because the alphabet is kind of very random, that the rules for sentences are he's saying that they are complex because the sentences that come out can be just an unlimited number of different kinds of sentences can be formulated just by working with 26 letters of the alphabet in English anyway. So what we're saying is that to him is an example of of this whole process where you have outcomes, the processes that are performed over them, and the inputs being the alphabet. So basically, let's take a look at what I think he's talking about. One of the things he says is that what he wants to do is determine, is it a complicated or a complex process, and how can we do that? And what he does is he says one of the things that he thinks basically provided is that in the outcomes is emergence. And what he means by emergence is he takes the example of you get two hydrogens, one oxygen, you combine them, and you end up with water. And water has an emerging property. Water has a property of wetness that neither hydrogen nor oxygen in and of themselves have. Whereas if you were to combine the numbers, the integers 1 and 5, and your answer were 6, the integer 6 really doesn't have properties that are different than the 1 and the 5. So emergence means that we're studying the outcome, and by looking at the outcome, we find that it actually has something that's different than just combining any of the properties of the input. So that in essence, what he's saying is that tells us that something complex is going on inside that process. That it's not just a simple combination process. So the chemical combination process is a complex process, whereas the mathematical combination process really isn't. And so that's one of his properties that he says, that we can look at outcomes, see emergence, and that tells us that we're looking at a complex process. Again, studying the outcome. So then he also says, now let's look at the other area. Let's look at inputs, which is his other area that he focuses on. And he says, inputs, basically, he defines inputs as agents. And he says that agents have a very strong adaptive property, if the agents that he's talking about with regards to a complex system. So if the agents are adaptive, then the system by necessity has to be able to facilitate adaptation, which makes the process itself complex, because the process has to have the ability to deal with an agent that is actually, it's like a moving target, and the ability to deal with a moving target and an adaptive agent means that the process in the middle is complex. It's not just complicated. It's a very complex process because it can actually deal with and facilitate an adaptive agent. The other thing that he tells us about agents is that agents has these tags, and an agent has multiple tags that it uses. and for signals, for communicating, and for working on the process. And what he talks about is that in order for tags to work, then the process itself has to be able to deal with diversity and specialization and have boundaries. So you have a process that says, all right, this agent has certain tags. So let's say the agent says let's say that we were starting with all insects, and then we were saying that the tag says I am a flying insect, and we only want to deal with specialization. We only want to deal with flying insects in this particular process. Then the process can segregate just the idea of insect and find just flying insects, and only flying insects can make their way into this particular process. So the process ability to deal with the tags, which means that as a process, I'm actually assessing certain things about the agents that I'm allowing into my input. So I'm not just receiving any input at all. I'm actually being very selective, and not only selective about whether in the number example, if I were to say integer plus integer equals an integer and a real number, I could prevent a real number from getting into my process theoretically. But in this case, the tags are, there's multiple tags about an agent, and the tags aren't everything about the agent. The tag might just be that the agent is green, not any specific color of green. And so that when it gets inside the actual process, then the process has to deal with all different levels of greenness, if you will. So it has to be able to deal with a diverse thing about the agent, but also with regards to these tags, there's multiple tags, and yet the agent gets into the process, simultaneously. So it's basically the process also is able to deal with parallel processes, because it's able to deal with parallel tags, so multiple tags, deal with them parallel in order to basically receive and accept the agent. So the process has to be, so again, that's telling us that we're talking about a pretty complex process, because it has a lot of these rules and other inside of the process itself that are helping us helping the process make these kind of decisions. The other thing is that he talks about the fact that agents also, that the process itself has to be able to deal with loops and recirculation, which means it has to have a look ahead capability, has to be able to have a piece of the outcome world and know basically what outcome it's looking for. So the agent has the ability, or the process has the ability to know what kind of output it's looking for, and therefore work off the agents that can deliver that kind of output, and then basically simulate what's going on inside the process before the process delivers the outcome. Then you have a complex process also, because you can't predict that ultimately what it's going to do, that it's going to give you the outcome that you want. It's basically making a decision inside the process that it's going to do that. And he talks about the agents then have capabilities there to help the process maintain things like performance of the agent, credit assignment, rules discovery, things that he talks about the agents that he says, it can do. If the agent can do these things, the agent then provides this information also, if you will, to the process, and lets the process be able to deal with that agent and decide what it's going to do as far as the outcome goes. So if you think of the combination, now you have these agents that that have tags, you have these agents that are adaptive, these agents that are providing their own rule discoveries, and now the process is dealing with those kind of complex agents. Then you know that you're really dealing with a complex process, because like I said earlier, it's such a moving target on the agents, and yet the process is still able to deal with them and deliver some kind of output. Now, what he also talks about is that you can't just look at the process, and if a process looks very, very complicated, you have to look at the outcome, and you have to also look at the predictability of the outcome. And he gets into the fact that if the outcome is very predictable, then in all likelihood the process is complicated but not complex. And so if it's highly predictable, then it's probably a complicated process. And even if it looks very complex, but but you can go to each one of the nodes, and in each node inside this thing, you can actually have a high degree of probability of what's going to occur and what the outcome is going to be. Then the chances are that you're not dealing with a complex process. The chances are that you're dealing with a very complicated process. And so, and if you think about it, processes are the multiple of of all the different hierarchy, is the multiple of all the different sub processes that are going on inside of here. So if your predictability is low, on two of these, it multiplies its way up. So the whole process then becomes very kind of unstable, and therefore you end up with a complex process because you cannot predict what ultimately is going to happen. So you can't predict the outcome. So basically, the more or the less predictable the outcome is, that's another way of identifying that we're dealing with a complex process because we cannot predict what the output is. So summary for me is that what he's really saying is that you can't look inside the process to say, wow, this is a complex process. Instead, you really have to study the inputs and the outcomes of a process to determine whether you're looking at a complex process or not. That's my summary of Holland's book. Thank you.